The courthouse had stood at the center of the city for longer than anyone could remember. Its towering stone columns overlooked crowded streets where merchants bargained, children played, and citizens hurried through ordinary lives. Every morning, before the markets reached their loudest hour, people gathered outside its enormous bronze doors. Some came seeking justice. Others came fearing it. Inside those walls, fortunes changed. Families were reunited. Lives were destroyed. Reputations were restored or buried forever. The entire city believed one simple truth. Justice lived there. And at the center of that justice sat one man, the judge. No one addressed him by his given name anymore. Time had erased it beneath the weight of his office. To the people, he had become something larger than a man. He was called the voice of justice. For more than 30 years, he had presided over thousands of trials. Thieves, murderers, corrupt officials, powerful nobles, desperate beggars. Every one of them eventually stood before the same bench. The same steady eyes, the same measured voice. The judge rarely hesitated. His decisions were admired for their precision. He listened patiently, questioned carefully, spoke only when necessary. Many believed he possessed an extraordinary gift, the ability to see truth where everyone else saw confusion. His rulings became legendary. Law students memorized them. Young judges quoted them. Even neighboring kingdoms requested copies of his most famous decisions. Justice, people said, had found its perfect guardian. And perhaps that was exactly the problem. Because after hearing thousands of lies, he slowly stopped believing honesty existed. After witnessing countless betrayals, he began expecting deception before trust. After judging so many failures, he quietly convinced himself that he stood above them, not out of arrogance. At least, not the kind anyone could easily recognize. It happened slowly, almost invisibly. Every guilty verdict reinforced the same quiet belief. I see more clearly than other people. I understand human nature. I know right from wrong. Those thoughts never left his lips, but they settled deep inside his mind. And beliefs repeated often enough eventually become identity. Each afternoon, after the courtroom emptied, the judge followed the same routine. He walked alone through endless corridors lined with portraits of judges who had served before him. He admired their discipline, their composure, their certainty. He wondered whether history would remember him as the greatest among them. Every evening, he returned to his large stone house overlooking the river. Servants prepared dinner. Letters from politicians awaited his attention. Invitations from wealthy families arrived almost daily. Everyone wanted the respect of the city's most trusted man. Yet despite all the admiration surrounding him, the judge lived alone. Not because he lacked company, because he trusted almost no one. He had seen too much, or so he believed. Even conversations became examinations. Every smile invited suspicion. Every compliment seemed calculated. Every apology sounded rehearsed. Years of judging others had quietly become a habit he could no longer turn off, even outside the courtroom. One rainy afternoon, the city's most anticipated trial began. The courthouse overflowed with spectators. A respected merchant stood accused of fraud against hundreds of families. The entire city waited for the verdict. The courtroom remained perfectly silent as the judge entered. Everyone stood. The proceedings lasted for hours. Witnesses testified. Evidence filled the room. Arguments rose and fell like waves. The judge listened without visible emotion. As always, when the final statement ended, he removed his spectacles, looked across the courtroom, and delivered a verdict so carefully reasoned that even the defense attorney quietly nodded in reluctant acceptance. Justice had been served, or so everyone believed. The crowd applauded as the guilty man was escorted away. Some people even bowed respectfully toward the judge. Another flawless decision, another example of his unmatched wisdom. As the courtroom slowly emptied, one person remained seated, an elderly traveler, simple clothes, weathered boots, a worn leather satchel resting beside his chair. He had not spoken once during the entire trial. He had simply watched. The judge noticed him immediately. "You may leave." The old traveler did not move. Instead, he calmly looked around the empty courtroom. His eyes paused briefly on the witness stand, then the defendant's chair. Finally, they settled upon the judge. There was no admiration in his expression, no fear, no resentment, only quiet curiosity. The judge repeated himself. "The trial has ended." The traveler smiled faintly. "I know. Then why are you still here?" The old man slowly stood. His footsteps echoed softly across the nearly empty courtroom. He stopped several feet before the judge's bench. "I wanted to see the man everyone calls Justice." The judge folded his hands. "And have you?" The traveler nodded once. "I have seen a man who understands the faults of others remarkably well." The judge accepted the compliment with a slight nod, but the traveler had not finished. Then, in the same calm voice, he continued, "Tell me, when was the last time you judged yourself with the same honesty?" The question seemed to stop the room itself. Rain continued striking the tall courtroom windows. The judge's expression remained composed, yet for the first time in years, he did not immediately know what to say. The silence stretched between them, long enough to become uncomfortable. The traveler picked up his satchel, turned toward the enormous courtroom doors, then stopped. Without looking back, he spoke one final sentence. "A man who never places himself on trial will eventually mistake certainty for truth." He walked toward the exit. Only when he reached the doorway did he pause once more. The fading afternoon light outlined his silhouette. Then he quietly spoke his name, Friedrich Nietzsche. The bronze doors closed behind him. The courtroom became silent once again. But this time, the silence felt very different. The courthouse opened as it always had. The great bronze doors welcomed another line of citizens seeking justice. Clerks arranged stacks of documents across heavy oak tables. Guards took their positions beside the entrance. Lawyers rehearsed their final arguments beneath the towering stone arches. Nothing had changed, and yet, somehow, everything felt different, because a single question had refused to leave the judge's mind. When was the last time you judged yourself with the same honesty? For years, he had questioned thousands of people, every hesitation, every contradiction, every hidden motive. He had learned to recognize guilt before many defendants recognized themselves. Yet now, one simple question followed him everywhere. That afternoon, another trial began. A young man stood accused of stealing food from a wealthy merchant. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Witnesses confirmed the crime. The merchant demanded the harshest punishment the law allowed. The courtroom waited. The judge listened carefully, just as he always had. The young man finally spoke. "My lord, I stole the bread." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The confession seemed to settle the matter. But before announcing his verdict, the judge noticed someone standing quietly at the back of the courtroom. Friedrich Nietzsche, watching, saying nothing. The judge suddenly found himself asking questions he had never considered before. Not about the crime, about the man. "What happened before you stole?" The young man hesitated. "My mother became ill. My younger sisters had not eaten in 2 days. I searched for work. No one would hire me. I begged. No one listened. So I stole." Silence settled across the room. The judge looked toward the wealthy merchant. "When was the last time you noticed the people working in your warehouses?" The merchant frowned. "My lord, that has nothing to do with the case." Perhaps it did. Perhaps it always had. For the first time in decades, the judge realized how easily justice could become mechanical. A law could explain what happened. It could not always explain why. The trial ended with a measured sentence. The young man would repay what he had taken through honest work rather than years behind prison walls. The merchant protested. Some lawyers whispered. Others looked surprised. As the courtroom emptied, Nietzsche approached the bench. "You questioned him differently today." The judge answered quietly. "I listened differently." Nietzsche nodded. "Good. But there is still one witness you have not questioned." The judge frowned. There were only 3 witnesses. Nietzsche shook his head. "There were 4. The judge looked confused. "The 4th witness has been sitting behind your eyes your entire life." The words settled into the empty courtroom because they carried an uncomfortable truth. Every judgment he had ever delivered had passed through one unavoidable filter: himself. Days passed. Nietzsche remained in the city. He attended every public hearing. He never interrupted, never offered legal advice. He simply watched. One rainy evening, after the final trial had ended, the judge invited Nietzsche into his private chambers. The room was lined with shelves filled with law books collected over an entire lifetime. Every wall displayed awards, honors, and letters of gratitude from kings, scholars, and citizens. The judge poured 2 cups of tea, then quietly asked, "You believe I have judged unfairly?" Nietzsche lifted the cup, but did not drink. "No." The judge looked relieved. "I believe you have judged incompletely." The answer struck harder than criticism. "What do you mean?" Nietzsche stood and slowly walked toward a large mirror hanging beside the fireplace. He looked into it for several moments, then turned back. "You examine every defendant. You investigate every witness. You question every motive." He paused. "But there is one person whose motives you have accepted without examination." The judge remained silent. Nietzsche stepped aside, revealing the mirror. "You." The room suddenly felt much smaller. The judge looked toward his own reflection. A respected man, an honorable man, a disciplined man. But was that all? Had he ever examined the pride hidden beneath his certainty? The satisfaction hidden beneath his authority? The comfort of always sitting above others? He could not remember. Not because he had done it long ago, because he had never done it at all. Nietzsche spoke one final time before leaving. The law can reveal another person's actions. He rested his hand upon the courtroom door. But wisdom begins the day you place your own soul under the same examination. The door closed softly behind him. The judge remained standing before the mirror. For the first time in 30 years, he was no longer preparing tomorrow's verdict. He was preparing to hear his own. Morning arrived beneath heavy clouds. Rain continued falling across the stone streets as citizens once again gathered before the courthouse, each carrying hope, fear, or regret through its great bronze doors. The city expected another ordinary day, another trial, another verdict, another reminder that justice still sat behind the highest bench in the kingdom. Nothing had changed, and yet somehow everything had, because something had shifted, not within the law, not within the courtroom, not within the people seeking justice, but within the man who had spent his entire life believing that wisdom meant seeing clearly into the hearts of others. For the first time in 30 years, the judge entered the courtroom without feeling certain. He walked slowly toward the great wooden bench where he had delivered thousands of verdicts. His hand rested upon its polished surface. He looked at it for a long moment. Then, he did something no one in the courtroom had ever witnessed. He walked past it. The clerks looked at one another in confusion. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Lawyers stopped whispering. The spectators fell silent. Instead of climbing to the judge's bench, he walked toward the defendant's chair, the chair where countless frightened people had sat before hearing the truth about their lives. Slowly, he sat down. The entire courtroom froze. No one understood what they were seeing. From the back of the courtroom, Friedrich Nietzsche quietly watched. He did not move. He did not speak, because this was no longer his lesson. It belonged to the judge. The judge looked around the courtroom. For the first time, he saw it from the other side. The towering bench no longer felt like authority. It felt like distance. The silence no longer felt powerful. It felt exposing. Then he spoke, not to the crowd, not to the lawyers, not to the court, to himself. For 30 years, I believed justice meant exposing the failures of others. A long silence followed. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows. Then he continued, "But I never asked whether I become blind to my own." The words echoed softly through the empty chamber. Because everyone present realized this had never been a trial of the law. It was a trial of certainty. The judge slowly stood. He looked toward the bench where he had built his reputation, then toward Nietzsche. His voice was quieter now, stronger. "Tell me, how can anyone judge fairly if they have never judged themselves?" Nietzsche stepped forward. His footsteps echoed across the stone floor until he stood between the bench and the defendant's chair, exactly halfway. as though reminding everyone that wisdom is never found entirely in authority or entirely in guilt, only in honesty. The philosopher looked at the judge, then calmly replied, "Justice does not begin with the law. It begins with humility." He paused. "The moment you believe you stand above judgment, you have already become its weakest servant." The words settled over the courtroom like the final page of a book. No one spoke. No one argued, because there was nothing left to defend. The judge turned one last time toward the great bench. For decades, he believed it elevated him above ordinary people. Now, he understood something entirely different. The higher he had sat, the less often he looked inward. He smiled faintly, not because he had found perfection, but because he had finally abandoned the illusion that he possessed it. Nietzsche adjusted his weathered cloak. Without waiting for applause, without asking for gratitude, he walked toward the great bronze doors. Before leaving, he stopped beneath the archway. Without turning back, he spoke one final sentence. "The greatest courtroom is the one hidden within your own conscience, and the wisest person is the one willing to stand there as both judge and defendant." The doors slowly closed behind him. Rain continued falling outside. The courtroom remained silent. The city would remember the judge for his remarkable decisions. History would praise his wisdom. But only one man would ever know the truth. His greatest verdict had never been delivered from the bench. It had been delivered to himself. And in that quiet judgment, he discovered something greater than justice. He discovered honesty.